is a very basic way. I know there are other subtleties, a lot of authors who think that not all the theses that are going to define here are even compatible, but this is just a general view. Cognitivism is the idea by which cognitive processes consist of the manipulation of certain mental representations under certain general rules, mostly algorithmic rules. And it's sometimes combined with the idea that organisms that possess these processes are somehow passive, or their perceptual processes are basically passive, or understood in a passive way. And this means that if we differentiate processes as computation or manipulations of representations and differentiate them from perception and action, we have three different kinds of processes. So perception, action, and computation are separate. This general view is applied to several branches of study, like cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience, and it's usually understood like the brain works as a computer, in which those cognitive processes work there. But there's another metaphor not so flamboyant as this one, like the sandwich of cognition, in which we have two layers, which are perception and action, and the really meaty thing is inside, which are the cognitive processes. On the other side, we have post-cognitivism, which is the idea that, in principle, we do not need to appeal to representations what cognition is. They prefer some other methodological tools, like dynamical systems, because cognition changes through time, and it can be applied, this methodology, to the agent as a whole, or to subpersonal processes like neural dynamics. Also consider that organisms that are capable of cognition are basically active. Basically considered as agents that they skillfully deal with the mental elements. And then they claim that there's something continuity between perception and action. That they are two sides of the same process, or they are two processes tightly connected. And the main theories are, as we all know, ecological psychology, which applies these dynamical systems to how agents deal with the information in the environment. An activist system is structurally coupled with the environment. So this is mainly an illustration of how we should think of. Cognitivism will say that we are passively impinged by the elements of the environment, then we have a representation we computed in order to produce an output, a behavioral output. On the other side, as I said, in the case of ecological psychology, the agent is actively dealing with the information of the environment and taking advantage of the possibilities for acting, for the different approaches, the affordances that he or she finds in his or her environment. So now I will define in a very brief way enactivism and ecological psychology. Enactivism, in all its varieties, they share main idea, that is that cognition emerges from recurrent sensory motor patterns that enable action to be perceptual. That will be the basic claim of any enactive view. So the key aspect here is sensory motor patterns, sensory motor contingencies. It's the idea that every contingency establishes a relation between organism and environment, and that relation consists of the idea that every action produces a different sensation. Contingencies, lawfully related, are what allows for the structural organism-environment encounter. And sometimes all these ideas are tied to the idea of adaptivity, especially for explaining learning and cognitive development. Adaptivity is the way in which organisms or agents are capable of regulating themselves to compensate for the perturbations of the environment that they explore. So these sensory motor contingencies are dynamically changing as well as the agent deals with the environment. On the other side, we have ecological psychology, which starts from a common claim that perception is continuous reduction. But the main contribution of ecological psychology is that the main unit of analysis is not the organism itself, is the organism So he explains how the combination of the physical forces and the active character of agents make appear to co-create ecological information. So this kind of information is not purely external as it happens in the deep screen view or in the Millicanian view. So the thing is that we co-create ecological information and we perceive it directly. Direct perception is the idea that we directly detect, as we explore the environment, ecological information. And there are no representational intermediaries in that transaction. Or, how Chavero puts it, there are no mental gymnastics that help us to explain how we detect it. So the idea is that when we detect ecological information, this ecological information is sufficient for guiding our actions, which means that it is meaningful. Again, meaningful doesn't is not related to any kind of representation-based content or something like that. The idea of meaning of something to be ecologically meaningful is the idea that it affords agents the possibility of performing certain actions. It's just that, no representation involved in this view. So this information, given that it affords agents to do certain things, is necessary and sufficient for predicting behavior. And as a conclusion, they say that perception is of affordances. That information shows us these rather than we. So we perceive them directly, and they endorse some kind of metaphysical consequence of all that, which is direct realism. It's the idea that once we focus on the organism environment system, and given that we perceive the co-created properties of the environment directly, which are the affordances, given that we perceive them directly, the world is, let's say, well, the environment, let's say, is transparent to us, so there's some kind of direct realism, which has nothing to do with metaphysical realism, as we will see later. So, now, let me introduce pragmatism, which is the common philosophical basis of this views. Acts against what is considered as the main view in the history of philosophy, endorsed by key authors like Plato or Descartes, which traditionally in the history of philosophy, cognition is considered as a kind of abstract reasoning from a disembodied and disembodied perspective. According to this view, knowledge, which is the product of cognition, representation of the world as it is. So there's some kind of gap between the world as it is and how do I reason about the world, and then I represent the world somehow. Sometimes this view, according to pragmatism, is linked to metaphysical realism, which is The main goal of metaphysics from this point of view will be to represent or describe the world as it is. So this is the whole view to which pragmatism reacts. According to pragmatism, cognition is not abstract reasoning, but a skillful ability to cope with our environment. And knowledge, the product of cognition, is not an abstract representation of the world as it is, but some kind of know-how. So, summing up, pragmatism emphasizes the practical and the active over the abstract and the passive. And now one key author in the pragmatist tradition is Dewey. If we want to understand in a more or less systematic way the philosophy of Dewey, we should start with the idea of experience, which is what vertebrates all branches of philosophy, according to Dewey. Experience is understood by Dewey as a dynamic transaction within a spatiotemporal time. It seems so neutral, but we are going to see how experience emerges based on different processes. So the idea is that experience is continuous. The idea of continuity is key in Dewey. It's continuous with the rest of nature. It doesn't matter if it is our ecological nature or our social nature. Everything is connected. And it is the basis for any kind of knowledge or psychological process, which are always understood as an ability, as some kind of skillful ability. So there's no gap between mind and world. There's no need to, no anxiety for reconciling both aspects. They are already connected. The idea of continuity permeates an explanation of our psychological processes. There will all be sets of skills, as I said, and also quite important, there's a methodological continuity, not only a methodological continuity. Continuity between philosophical problems and scientific inquiry. If we explain how we deal with nature, taking the skillful abilities as a basis, then what we have is that we address philosophical concerns and we try to solve them with empirical methodologies. And the anthropological philosophy of Dewey starts with the idea that every individual develops his or her own perspective, history of interactions. That is the basis for knowledge, according to Dewey, and for cognitive and even political development. But we are not going to deal with Dewey's politics here as well, although there is a really interesting connection. And this idea of continuity and experience permeates all branches of Dewey's philosophy. For example, in epistemology, he defended an experimental theory of knowledge, by which the construction of knowledge, even this dynamical development of, is a self-correcting and reversible process, because if we are dealing with different environmental features, everything is constantly changing. We are adapting to new changes, to new perturbations. So we should self-correct our ways of understanding how we connect to the world, and we have to revise our epistemology and our scientific methodology from time to time. And this is achieved thanks to endorsological fallibilism, which is the idea that the veritative status of a proposition is subjected to critical re-examination by the community of inquirers. So this is a logical tool for achieving that naturalistic enterprise. And then experience is constantly changing and situated and embodied is tightly related to metaphysics, because in the picture that I showed before, metaphysics started from necessity, from the idea that we should explain the world sub specie eternitatis, or from the point of view of God, the structure of the world as it is. But this is a different, totally different starting point. It claims that contingency is an inescapable feature of human existence, because we should explain human existence and our depiction of the world from our own point of view. So we should stop looking at the world sub specie eternitatis, and this is a real critique to metaphysical realism. And now we are going to the key aspect of Dewey psychology. That are really useful for us for understanding how Dewey develops his sound views on psychology. At the very beginning, Dewey reacts against the reflex arc in psychology. This view states that every psychological process is understood as a reflex arc, and a reflex arc is with abstract steps from input to output. The problem that Dewey has with this view is that it neglects the context of the organism and the reciprocity of perception action. So he aims to reject this view and offer a new candidate for an ecological explanation. And the main inspiration for doing this is in the work of Darwin. The evolutionary contributions of Darwin, Darwin started to think about those problems with the idea that organisms and their environments cannot be studied separately. This is what Dewey emphasizes of the work of Darwin, and he aims to apply develop our own psychological process is called organic coordination. Given this reciprocity of incorporate to the different we are skillful dealing with the environment. So they range from physiological processes to abstract reasoning, and this view allows Dewey to have a innovative view on learning as the acquisition of the right habits. So now we're going to see how Dewey influences the enacted view and ecological psychology. Influence of Dewey in activism is through the idea of modern contingency. Modern contingencies are the lawful relation to the environment, action produces a sensation, and this and they are useful for establishing individual point of view thanks to the individual's history of interaction explained through these contingencies. So what I think is that the Western idea of organic coordination that was presented at the early 20s is championed to this sensorimotor account And it contains, this sensory-motor account of this activity contains key aspects of the Deweyan spirit for explaining psychology. For example, the continuity between organism and environment, and also addressing philosophical concerns like how it is possible that I perceive this or that, or different philosophical problems on color, for example, through science. So they contrast the active agent exploring against the traditional view that we represent the world in a passive way. But there's another not so obvious influence in ecology. We influence Gibson in a certain way, but I think that this influence is underestimated. I think that there's much more of Dewey's in Gibson's works that sometimes historians claim. According to Dewey, habits are acquired by the active exploration of the ecological and social environment, and habits are specifically to certain stimuli. We can talk about sensitivity or stimuli because it's kind of a behavioristic vocabulary to him, but the underlying rationale is totally shared. The detection of those stimuli allow you to perform certain actions. And this is a key point, because Dewey says something about how we should conceive this, this sensitivity. He thinks that we are sensitive to them because they are valuable for us. They allow us to perform certain actions. So value somehow is linked to the active capacity of agents. Dewey advocated in favor of a continuity between our social and ecological environment, and how value and nature are not contradictory, but they are also continuous. He links value into the active capacities of agents, which is the same idea of ecological meaning as I presented it before. So the meaningful environmental aspect reveals different possibilities for acting to the agent, which I think that is totally compatible with the idea of Gibson's affordances. We could say that Gibson developed the idea of affordance in order to complement from the environment the idea of the way and habit that Dewey coined. So now comes the part in which I try to organize all this. We have seen how an activism and ecological psychology share a non-representational, embodied and situated account of cognition. Both approaches reject metaphysical realism. So there's a lot in common. In fact, what I think is that they emphasize different aspects and elements of what could be considered as the whole cognitive picture. As fighting for giving the best explanation of the very same processes at the very same level or scale, I think that they are focusing different. This implies no contradiction, but certain complementarity. I think that activism emphasizes agency and personal processes in a certain sense, given the insistence on how the brain and neural patterns shape these contingencies. And on the other side, I think that ecological psychology is not interested in explaining how subjectivity emerges, because it goes from a totally different point of view, which is the point of view of the organism environment system, just working as a system. So I think that these are totally different levels. We take the Deweyan framework as a guide. There could be room for reconciling the two approaches and combine them as complementary aspects in a single. And it could be done in two different ways. At an empirical level, we could see how organic coordination is working at two different levels. For example, at the subpersonal level, we could see how this sensory motor coordination and structural coupling is achieved, but also organism environment system level, how this organism environment is done thanks to ecological information. And there are a lot of empirical data, each one of these views. So I think that if we take this multi-level approach, we could emphasize the complementarity. At the same time, I think that there are some philosophical concerns that could be addressed in a separate way. Given that enactivism emphasizes agency and the shaping of cognitive and biological agency sometimes from a bottom-up approach, it is normal that they could be concerned about how to naturalize subjectivity from this bottom-up approach based on sensory-motor interactions. And how subjectivity naturalizes a first-person perspective is established by this history of interactions. But I think that this claim is not incompatible with the claim defended by ecological psychology that we have to overcome subjectivity and objectivity as a false dualism. Because they focus on this idea as a false dualism because the point of view of ecological psychology is totally at a different level. It's simply not interested in explaining how there could be a bottom-up approach for shaping cognitive agency, because they don't want to emphasize, the cognitive constitution of the agent. They just want to explain how the organism environment system works. So there's another level, and there's another goal, let's say. So that is why I think that given that there are different goals at different levels, they could be complemented. And the general picture could be something like this, in which we have the organism environment system, and we have different levels of working at the same time. On the one side, we will have different objects and active agents, and these active agents interact with the object, affordances and detects ecological information. And one feature of ecological information is that it is not, it is channel independent. We perceive the same information independently of if it is visual or tactile or whatever. Some experiments, some sensory institutions show this and reinforce this idea. We could have an explanation of this coupling of the active agent and the object based on ecological information, and also we have another coupling from the subpersonal point of view. For example, the central nervous system has contributed to develop certain contingencies with the object. So I think that these are two different perspectives on the same phenomena, with two different empirical methodologies, with two different epistemic and metaphysical goals that could be complemented in the same framework in a multi-level scale. So, in order to conclude, Dewey's main ideas, specifically organic coordination and habits, are an inspiration for enactivism and ecological psychology, as I tried to show. Can be taken as a basis for a compatibility between enactivism and ecological psychology, applying, for example, organic coordination at two different levels, but also properly addressing different philosophical concerns at their own goals and levels. And I hope that this two-level combination of enactivism and ecological psychology, thanks to the idea of organic coordination, can help to unify both theories in a single post-cognitivist framework and field of research. So that's it. Thank you.
For a very interesting talk, we are open for 5 to 10 minutes discussion, so make the questions short and for a short.
Thank you for your I just have a question, a very general one.
These are the most scariest questions because you go to the very basis, so everything is going to crumble.
So you're right. I like the idea that you're trying to develop a kind of a unified agenda for communism. And you mentioned the 3 or 4 basic suppositions of cognitism, right? So it's representation, computation, but there's another one, and that's individualism, with the idea that an organism on itself, right? I mean, and my worry is that the individualism or not individualism thing also crosses in the post-cognitive camp. So talking about the environment that you mentioned, social environment, I have the impression that the social environment and the natural environment are the same, right?
That's what Dino says.
But I have worries about that because specifically in the pictures you showed, which were very nice. For example, the last one, you have an organism environment interaction, and what you have is an object and an agent. And the problem is that object means it's a ready-made structure already there, whereas you might think that in a social environment that's not really there. I mean, you have all kinds of other interactions which are not. So I'm just worrying.
I think I totally agree with what you said. It's just a picture that I wrote.
But also you mentioned the thing about stimuli, and also there I'm a bit worried.
Yeah, because I want to complicated because all these theories do not share even the same vocabulary. So I tried to find the most neutral terms. For example, when I said stimuli, I said from the Gibsonian point of view, Gibson or Gibsonians would not accept this word. But I totally agree with what you say. In fact, I'm in the process of writing a paper of how social normativity works and how it is a constitutive, also transformative process that even permeates how we perceive things.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with the point. I just wanted to draw a very simple picture to get the
Thank you.
So, can we go back to the slide about the 2 levels? No, the 2 levels.
This one?
Yes. So, one question is, I'm thinking that you have like an activist picture of one level and then a Gibsonian picture of the other level. If that were so, then I will think that I will propose that is why so, right? It seems like activism is also one societal personal level. Maybe ecological psychology also has claims about other levels. So why think that in order to combine this view, one takes care of one level and the other one takes care of the other? This seems to be more like Dewey and try to synthesize in activism and ecological psychology in terms of modern picture where we don't have these clashes. Concepts maybe, right?
Well, I think that would be the right logical development of what I said here. I addressed the distinction between the personal and subpersonal level, which I know this sounds quite cognitivist, but it's a well-established picture that could help us to see how different approaches emphasize different processes. I know that the enacted view, for example, that strand of the enacted view defended by Paolo, Barbiaran, and Eckler, they would not be quite comfortable to be in this level because what they are explaining is how the agent as a whole is dealing with the environment. But at the same time, if you check their literature, and they are constantly saying at the very beginning of the paper, this is about the agent and about the brain is part of the whole agent, and the like. But then when they go to the specifics, when they go to see how that cognitive agency is shaped, they adopt a bottom-up approach, and they start to say the sensory, the central nervous system is linked to different elements of the environment and things like that. So they go so personal. I know that this could be also understood as some kind of constitutive process from the bottom up. But even that, for example, this body, for example, or Reagan, they emphasize the brain creating actions, things like that. I know. The problem of these general talks is that everyone is not satisfied. Generally.
You want to say that sensory motor contingent is higher than the personal level. That's fine. It's just the idea that you have the inactivism coming at one level and the psychological coming at another level, that seems to create problems. But if you take concepts that they use and then you synthesize a view, which you can talk of aspects that they are talking about at different levels, that seems to be perfectly fine.
Maybe that's what I have to propose next time that I get this.
Yeah, it's almost the same thing, because I was going to say that you in your, especially in your presentation of what activism, you tie it to the sensory motor view, and it seems the sensory motor view allows absolutely what you have done because it contains all kinds of formulations, and one of them has to do with sensations and the sensation view, but it also contains the Gibsonian view of perception as based on the coupling and on finding or being sensitive to invariants which are co-created by the coupling, which is very much the Gibsonian view. So that's all in there, but also some of it you highlighted. But it's problematic to connect these problematic aspects within activism in total and to create an opposition between activism and ecological psychology.
Yeah, maybe that was not the wisest way to put this, but I thought that it was just these differences of levels were going to illustrate the different emphasis the different theories have. But yeah, that I think that is which is basically the same as Brenda says. Yeah. I think it is correct. And for example, Chimero tries to organize this view, but or propose this view, but I think that he put so much emphasis in the autopoietic idea that may not be related to all kinds of activism, and I think we should find another kind of basis that could make everyone happy.
Okay, let's for a question.
All right. My question is about Chimero proposes this idea that ecological psychology is a direct descendant of American pragmatism, particularly William James. My question is, so in this course, ecological psychology has inherited some philosophical baggage of pragmatism. And the problem is that certain of these theses are not consistent with a more hardcore form of scientific realism. In particular, the shunning of a correspondence theory of truth and the watering down conceptions of objectivity. But in my mind, I don't see a problem of framing ecological psychology in these terms. Because, for instance, Gibson speaks of the registering of invariance in the ambient light array. That can be given a very precise characterization of homomorphism theory, and if you believe that such characterizations are what you would expect from a strong version of objectivity, that may work out. And in Chimero's analysis of the concept of affordance, a situation affords a certain behavior, a feature of a situation affords a certain types of behaviors for an organism with a certain ability. He attempts to frame that in a sort of realism of in hacking and references. Imagine that biosphere never exists on the face of the planet. The planet is completely devoid of life. Even so, the rocks on the surface of the planet would afford climbability to squirrels. If squirrels never existed, rocks would still afford climbability to squirrels. So my question is there anything I am missing here? Can you truly frame ecological psychology in a more hardcore scientific realist way with the corresponding theories of truth and some sort of metaphysical realism? Or is there something context that is inconsistent and we need a more watered down account of truth? And
thank you for your comments. Those were my concerns when I started to write my PhD thesis, because I think it could be possible to ground the philosophical approach of ecological psychology on those terms of strong scientific realism and this strong notion of objectivity. That is why I didn't do it. I think it could be done. I think if someone who is a metaphysician could start thinking about possible words in which objects that they do not claim to be in those words are directed to different objects that afford something to. But I think that if we want to, make justice to the philosophical inspiration of Gibson's approach, that is not the right path. I can understand why someone with a background of defending some kind of a strong scientific realism would want to solve those problems and would like to answer those questions. On the other side, I think that your depiction of Chemero's view is quite good, in the sense that, of course, he emphasizes, as Harry Heft emphasizes, the Janesian contribution to Gibson's work. But I think that even when Gibson explicitly acknowledges the influence of James, I think the real influence here is that of Dewey. Because in the history of pragmatism, the main difference between James and Dewey at the metaphysical level, it was that James claimed that pragmatism is metaphysically neutral, while Dewey, as we have said, is taking this continuity between scientific methodology and philosophical concerns, and also this idea of contingency, and explain our own point of view as based on contingency in a really empirical way. So I think that the main influence is not James, it's Dewey. And the questions that you said after that, like imagine a possible world in which once you embrace this pragmatist naturalism, you just don't feel that you have to answer to those questions in order to.
Okay, but I can give a better example. Like,
sorry about that, but we have another talk.
We can discuss stuff here.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
Before introducing the next talk, I would like to say that I've seen people taking pictures of the slides. I would like to invite the contributors to give us the slides so we can put on the website. So it will be public and free for everybody there.
is it being streamed?
Yeah, we are trying that. But the first talk by Manuel is there, where we didn't see if it worked. I was going to have to check it out.
I cut my own head off.
Yeah. So we have to see that. But the idea is
Você para você. Aqui, ó. Ele está aqui, ó. Ele está aparecendo.
Okay, it's a pleasure to introduce the next talk by Dr. Brito. The talk is entitled Information from Victor is not here right now. Let's go back to the problem. The motivation for the problem is basically this situation in biology. You have using the concept of information in biological explanations, but it tricks in the enthusiasts. You have people like, for example, this guy over here, owners. Our theories could be expressed as logical concerns. And you have some other people who would say, like the second one here, well, information will talk about biology that knows. And some other people even say that it's metaphorical and don't mean anything about framing out expressions in terms of information. So we have this kind of controversy. Well, I believe the problem is biologists are attempting to adapt existing concepts and theories of information to their explanations, but the theories of information that we have were not devised to talk about biological phenomena. So we have, for example, like Shannon theory, Rats theory, Turing theory, like computational stuff, like doing work for us. And all those theories are not adequate for biology because they are inherently based on abstract ideas. Some intuition about abstract ideas, and then the biologists try to kind of adapt whatever they see in the microscope to whatever those guys are talking about. And my goal here in this talk is to articulate a naturalized concept of information in terms of causal relations between material structures. And more precisely, I think my initial motivation was to answer this question by Howard Petit, which is, when does a molecule becomes a message? If we can answer this question, then we have taken a step forward. And the strategy is actually taking the provocation from Griffiths and turning it into a strategy. So he says, genetic information is a metaphor in search of a theory. So yeah, that's it. We should have a metaphor, but the right metaphor. If we have the right metaphor, then perhaps we can turn this metaphor into a theory of information that works for biology. That's the question. And we have a hint here from Wittgenstein. He says, words and chess pieces are analogous. Knowing how to use a word is like knowing how to use to move a chess piece. So if you have the right metaphor, perhaps this metaphor brings you to the center of the phenomena, and then you can develop from there. First, sorry. 1 second. Sorry. I started with this idea. The same as in biology, we don't have a well-defined general concept of information for human affairs. We have several theories which focus on different aspects of information, but do not have a clear, unified understanding. We have already said that we have information for, information about, information this, information that, instructional information, semantic information, but we don't have one theory.
And, well, it doesn't matter. People are happy about that. People talk about information, people use information, and nobody seems to have a problem with that. I would say, well, if people don't have a problem with that, why don't we start observing how information is used in everyday activities and take this point and observe what is essential about information. But there's a problem. We are not in a good position to do this. And this is an important trait here. I believe that we, as humans, are part of the entanglement of causal relations and structures that instantiate the evolution of information. If this is so, then we cannot like do this kind of observation. And I call this like the classical problem. So another idea, if you cannot observe our own dealings with information, perhaps we can move our attention to the computers, because with the computers we can open the box, we can see inside what is there. We can know how it was constructed and why it was constructed that way. So this is like my strategy. And then you can ask, what is information for a computer? Actually, we can have a different question. We can ask, does the analogy of the piece of the game apply to the computer? And I answer, yes, sometimes. Example. Well, not really an example yet, but what does it mean for the analogy of the piece of the game to work? Well, it means that there is this protocol here. You have to, the first step is to identify which piece you have in your hand. You make the move, right? So does the computer work that way? Well, sometimes yes. It takes the input, it compares the input to the pattern which are stored over there, and then if it matches, then it takes the action, right? And example is like database applications. But it's not always so. Consider this trivial example. You have a program which takes two numbers, multiply them together, and provide the answers. There's no identification step here. You don't have to check which numbers you got as input to produce the answer. You just manipulate them together and then you give the input for it. But for example, there are programs which take those calculations to control the operation and function they are going to perform. So this is the computer. This is the whole. There's nothing inside there because there's no input yet. So that's the beginning. Then we have the input. Now I have some input already. Then the execution starts. It doesn't need to reach the input yet, but after a while it reaches the input, right? And then something interesting happens, which is it may branch in different directions, the execution, because different inputs may have been provided, right? So what happens to the program is a different thing in different situations. And moreover, the computer ends up doing different things when it has received different inputs. This gives us the idea, well, the observation first, right? Before the input information has been received, both the operation and the function of the computer are undetermined. This gives us the idea of characterizing a computer as a machine with missing parts. That's actually second step. Third step. So we are going to work with this analogy to try to develop a sketch of theories information that works for life. Then we can compare this analogy with the analogy of the piece of the game, and we see that there are some common features. You have on the one side like the game, and what corresponds to the game is the functional context in which the machine works. On this side you have the player, on that side you have the machine itself. On this side you have the movement in the game. And on that side, you have a function that the machine can perform in that context. And finally, the piece of the game is like the machine part, which is the information. But more importantly, we have an important difference here. And the difference is, the piece of the game has an arbitrary form and is associated with a conventional rule. On the other hand, the form of the machine part actually determines the causal interaction with the other components and directs the machine towards the execution of a function, the realization of a function. This is like playing with the analogy for a while. I'm not sure if I'm going to go through this, but this idea is compatible with channel scheme. It's like kind of playing. Transmission of information, like taking the piece from one place to another. Like the channel is the vehicle that transports the part. The set of messages could correspond to the collection of parts that can be fed in the machine. The probability which is associated with each message corresponds to the idea that some pieces are more frequently used than others. And the entropy, I think this is an interesting idea. The entropy in channel theory is like a sort of measure of the uncertainty on the receiver side of the thing. And here, this corresponds to the fact that the function of the machine and even the operation flow remains undetermined prior to the placement of the part. We also have, this is nice, I have found this in the paper. Shannon says, the receptor system must be designed to operate for each selection of an action. So he's actually thinking of the receptor system as a machine. We also capture with the analogy some linguistics aspects of information. A linguistic token has like a semantic and a syntactical dimension, which corresponds to the typo content dichotomy. In our case, syntax is anything related to form. So the part concretely has a physical form and some local interaction which are determined by the form. Semantics would be like the function associated with the part. In pragmatics, the idea that there is an arbitrary character to information. And this would capture in our analogy with the idea that the connection between the machine part and the function is mediated by the operation of the machine. If you change the machine, in another machine, then the same piece, the same part will have a different function. And we also have some ideas of information processing related to the analogy, which is the idea that the machine part should be put into operation immediately. It can be left aside. And this is like the storage of information. The machine can inspect, the machine part can interact with other components without immediately triggering the function. And this would be like inspection. Parts could be rearranged after inspection. And this is some sort of processing. A selection mechanism inside the machine could choose which part to use next. And then you can visualize that set of parts which are stored there, like a space of possibilities for action next. The idea of internal state, which are those parts which are not associated with functions, but affect the selection mechanism. This is my third story. The fourth story is the idea that this analogy, which was stated in the intuitive level, can be formalized and given precise formulation using the concept of constraint. For doing this, it's a good idea to make it the information that system in the same way as a new part actually charts the realization of a function. It says information acts as a constraint. This connection between constraint and information has already been noted by several people, but none of them, as far as I know, have developed this as a systematic theory. So that's what I'm proposing. Okay, so what is a constraint? Here's a definition of a constraint. Constraint refers to a reduction of the degrees of freedom of the elements of a system. And here we have like a few illustrations. Let me give an example. like skeleton is a constraint on the sort of movements that I can do with my body. I cannot like turn my arm this way because my skeleton is not allowing me to do that. But this is like the internal structure. External structure is the idea that I cannot go this way. This is a boundary condition. So it's another sort of constraint. The third idea of constraint, the third instantiation of the idea of the constraint is the idea of control. If you have a system which is powered by itself, it moves by itself, and you are here, then you can control the system by playing with the degrees of freedom of the system. Control is also instantiated by the notion of constraint. And finally, you have this nice image by Michel Coligny, who says that machines and organisms are dual control systems. On the one side, they are controlled by natural processes like combustion and digestion and things like that. On the one side. And on the other side, you have constraints like boundary condition, and he says harnessing the energy which is liberated by that sort of process that's going below. And we see here that the analogy of the machine part is just an illustration for the concept of constraint. So we have here like the machine part, which is the constraint. Over there we have like the system with degrees of freedom is actually my machine with a missing part. And over there we have like behavior or function or operation or whatever. Here's my definition. So if anyone asks, what's your definition of information? So information for me is this. It's like a constraint that comes from outside the system, interacts with some internal components, determining the behavior of the system, which a function in a relational context. What some remarks about this definition are it articulates dynamics at three-level organization, the local interaction with other components, the mode of operation of the machine, the functional context involving other systems or perhaps just the environment. This definition departs from most existing accounts of information in at least two ways. The first way is it makes no reference, whatever, to intrinsic properties of the object. It doesn't talk about marks, differences, patterns, sequences, anything. And the second thing is, well, doesn't involve any notion of content also. And now I think I can answer this question. When does a molecule becomes a message? Well, a molecule becomes a message whenever the causal relations which are mediated by the molecule satisfies this framework over here. But then somebody would say, a concept of information which does not involve some notion of content is insufficient for biology. And here, it's like you can almost hear biologists say, the DNA is a text. There's something written there. So we are going to try to find some notion of content here. Well, our analogy of the machine part has a dual character. And the intuition is the part which plays the role of information has to couple with the other parts of the machine to define a mechanism, and this mechanism is the thing that implements the function. And the duality is the fact that the machine part both directs towards the realization of the function, and it also contributes to the implementation of the mechanism which actually realizes the function. If you take, for example, the notion of information as a signal, which is like the simplest and most familiar instance of information we have, we see that the signal implements just the first part of the duality. And I would claim that, well, why does it implement just the first part? Because it indicates what should be done, but not how it should be done. And the conclusion is, well, if it just implements the first part, I think there's something missing here, which is the conclusion being, well, if it does what to do, but not how, so there is no content there. And if there is no content, it's just the first part, we should look to the other side of the joint to find the notion of content that we are looking for. Then you can take this example. Like we have here like the jukebox, and we have here the piano. The jukebox, we can say the following. All the constraints which are responsible for the reproduction of the song are all inside the system. By contrast, this system over here can only reproduce isolated notes. All the constraints that define the music, the melody, the rhythm, the harmony, should come from the outside. I have here my third notion of information, information as a program. Information as a program corresponds to the idea that the external constraint that comes to the system articulates and controls the operation of basic mechanisms that it defines a mechanism that implements a new function at a higher level. Try again. So information as a program corresponds to the idea that the external constraint articulates and controls the basic mechanism to implement a higher mechanism that implements a function. This. Okay, but the constraint doesn't control anything. The constraint, the idea of the constraint is that it just affects, and that something else does the operation. So the notion of information as a program presupposes this. It is a reading mechanism. So here I have this would work as my definition of information as a program, again in the form of a drawing. The program would be considered as a collection of signals, which these reading mechanisms will trigger those basic functions over here. Right? This would be like the simplest version of a program, a sequence of instructions. Do this, and do this, and do this, and do this. Where this, do this, is this guy over here. There's another interesting situation in which those signals over here are not just being directed to those guys, but also to this guy over here. So we can have like signals being sent to this guy to instruct this guy how it should interpret the signals which are over here. Right? So there's some interesting things going over there. Levels of organization. The whole thing is the mechanisms that implements the new function. The image over here is not like a machine which has a few missing parts, but an entire mechanism missing. We also have a note here which is this account seems to give us which is information brings new form into the system, where the form is basically the system itself. Six. It's tested. The beginning, I said that the motivation was to get those works for biology. And what does it mean to work for biology? Well, I have these two criteria over here. It should give us a more precise and clear understanding of what is information for biology. And it should also lead us to the formulation of new ideas and new hypotheses. To make this discussion, I'm going to take this paper. It's like benchmark. Okay. What is the goal of Moreno and Ruiz-Mirazo? The goal of Moreno and Ruiz-Mirazo was to explain open-ended character of Darwinian evolution in terms of information. That's what they want. And the story in the paper is basically this. They say, the robust self-maintenance of complex chemical networks, regulatory mechanisms based on polymers with specific sequences and degraded products. They move on and say, this thing becomes more efficient if you have a sort of division of labor. Catalytic proteins which specialize in the regulation. Like other molecules like the DNA, which specialize just on the role of storing and transmitting information. And they say that whenever you have this strong dynamical decoupling, that's how they call it, this separation brings forth a compositional domain of sequences and we see where do they take the idea of information from? They take from these three related ideas. Sort of analogy of written text. They call attention all the time for the linear structure of the DNA and the operations of copying and translation, which are taking place all the time. Attention to this analogy of what I call analogy of programming. They call attention that DNA sequences can be broken apart and then taken together again in a different form so that you can construct and create new information from existing information. They also call attention to the fact that you have that compositional domain. They characterize it as an abstract domain of formal entities which are interpreted in the concrete domain of objects and relations of the organelle of the cell. So they base their interpretation on these three related ideas. Curious fact is that none of those ideas are present in our account. We say that we have information going on in the cell because we do have the dynamical decoupling, the separation of domains. But what we say is those two sides are interacting through exchange of constraints, which is basically information. So there is an informational dialogue going on here. And I have like these four numbers over here instantiate the ideas that I have talked to you about. You have those proteins which are synthesized by the DNA, which are sent to the metabolism to play some work there. This is what I would call information as a machine part. You can also have some ideas of synthesized here, sent over there just to trigger a function. This is information as a signal. The DNA itself is like information as a program. And finally, you can have like feedback from metabolism itself and also the environment, allowing the DNA operation to be sensitive to the state of the environment and the metabolism. And this is again information flowing in this direction. And I think there are two advantages at least with respect to the other account. The first one is only talking about causal and functional relations during the lifetime of the cell, while Moreno and Heras-Escribano instantiate the conditional level and so on. More important, I'm not based on abstract ideas of pattern, common, formal sequences, etc., which Moreno and Heras-Escribano start from, and then try to instantiate in the illustration of the cell. On the other hand, I think the two accounts are complementary. Why? First, they focus on different levels of the causal structure of the cell. Moreno and Heras-Escribano concentrate on the immediate causal relation between DNA and protein. They call attention to the fact that the same sequence which is in the DNA is the one which is in the protein, and they call this formal position and so on. By contrast, we bypass all local interactions. And the fundamental relation between structure and process, between information and function, which is the relation of constraint. But once we realize this point, guess that actually Moreno and Luis Mirazo are working on a relation, which is the relation of matter restructuring. So on the one side, you have a structure giving form to a process in the relation of a constraint. You have processes which restructure the matter giving form to the matter. So you have these two sides. They don't put things this way. I think this only becomes visible once this becomes visible. And I think this game of two sides is the key for two interesting characteristics that arise in biology, which is extreme complexity and creativity. Let's talk about this a little bit. Extreme complexity is the idea that, first, a material system which has a fixed structure can be at most so much complex. On the other hand, if you have a material system which is controlled, this problem can assemble and disassemble mechanisms. So the same material basis can be available for achieving extreme functional complexity. It's also number 6 as well. What about open evolution? Or what is the trick for creativity? Our analysis of information calls attention to the fact that the informational system is essentially incomplete. It exists in a functional context, but it's sort of functionally open. There's nothing inside which determines what's going to do next. This determination comes from the outside in the form of the relation of constraint. Something else constrains the system. But once you have this separate over here, again, a relation going on, which is the natural structure. So that which controls the system can be subject to the modification and trying to find what's. How does it work? It works because the functional response of the system can fit back to natural structure. So this is the trick for creativity. And this trick has been played by nature not only once, not twice, but at least 3 times. First, the separation of DNA, cell, and organism. Second, when you have this idea of the brain and the body as separate entities, and you have like the brain coming up with these new ideas all the time. And I believe a third is the idea that you have language and social groups. We also call like a fourth one, which is like software and hardware, but I'm not sure if software and hardware is that different from this one. This is the end of my second story. And that explains our conclusion. It's sort of a light note to finish the talk and some speculative ideas. It's a story. Manuel and Luis Mirazo tell the story of the world of information linked to the world of life. We fast forward many millions of years in time, and you find a great diversity of animals foraging and hunting. These animals have delicate sensorial apparatus and sophisticated brains to incorporate cues from the environment into their doings. And I would say that this is the good and old information as a machine part of it. But there is one particular species of animal, which is the primates, which they go hunting together. and they shout, and they make a lot of noise in their collective activities. And this practice is very effective, as it provides alternative routes for the environment cues to affect their doings. But at this point, shouting is just what they do. But being so effective, it doesn't take long for the shouts to be produced systematically to indicate relevant objects and situations of the environment. And this is information as a signal. And now I don't have to wait much for the appearance of information as a problem position, which allow the animals to operate arbitrary complex descriptions, both actual and possible, requiring mechanisms for verification and correction of errors, notions of truth and false. What we're proposing here is to move our focus from facts to functions in our investigation of language. Language appears to use primarily a regulatory system. But a regulatory system is a very special property in the sense that language can regulate its own practices and uses. It's sort of a second-order regulatory system. And this sort of folding upon itself could be the key for the level of confidence. And finish here.
Very interesting talk and keeping the time. Sure. Okay, we are open for questions. Okay, and that was again the first one here.
Let's try to use some Look, I find it absolutely wonderful the work that appeared. I would like to attempt to understand in your framework something that is very, very basic on perception, from a representationalist camp or a Gibsonian camp. When, for instance, you have a predator that is effectively tracking a certain organism, it was selected for hunting. But there is a situation in which there is another feature of the environment, another kind of organism. He was not selected for tracking, but that he is tracking at that moment. Those in the representation of this camp would say that we have an instance of a misrepresentation. And those in the Gibsonian camp would not have the same issue of misrepresentation because they are not representationalists, but they have an analog problem. Have to account for that sort of failure. And how do you account for that sort of without something like an adequacy condition, a correctness condition, and so on? So I was thinking about here, in this situation, here, the predator that is tracking effectively, selected to track the other predator that is tracking a dummy. In the first and the second case, the internal constraints would be the same. But in both situations, the external constraints, at least part of them, would be different. Would that be the way in which you get contentless covariance that is merely causal functional without content? Or is there any way we can get some sort of failure? Because in order for us to get failure, we need properties. What do you make of that?
So you start talking. I realize that, well, I wouldn't say that there is a failure there. When you are in the instance of the animal itself doing its job, there is no failure at that point, right? But you can instantiate the notion of failure at this level over here. On the process of constructing a material structure which does the job right, then it can appear like the idea of, well, this is a failure, this is not a failure. But at the level of activity, I don't see anything like a failure going on. At the level of an animal tracking a prey. Afterwards, when you have like social activity and language and everything, then you have the tools to playing this game. And then when you are during lifetime playing this game, then you have like the idea of a failure and what would be like the alternatives for doing the right thing.
Yeah, I don't find it entirely satisfactory. I believe we can argue that from the point of view of the cognitive system, it is failing because in a biosemantical point of view, it is failing to do what it was designed under scare codes to do. So I don't
Yeah, I
see
think
how-
I don't have use for this notion of design for whatever it is.
Of course, but this is a metaphor. We can talk about the natural, proper biological function. Okay.
I think this notion of proper function only arises when you are at this level, at the populational level, and the idea that the species has to go on. But at the time of activity, I would say that I can see a figure over it. Which we, as humans, with language, can internalize and talk about that. But the animal itself, I wouldn't say so.
Okay, before Manuel says,
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. Question for clarification. Are you arguing that this notion of information is a way of naturalizing information, or are you arguing that this is a way of proposing to describe some biological phenomena? What is exactly your purpose of the proposal?
The proposal is a theory of information that works for biology, a concept of information for the biologists to use. And as it turns out, it's a natural concept because it's based on your natural thing.
And if it's a kind of naturalization, my question is, how can you ground the natural status of this notion if you are linking to the concept of constraint? Because it makes sense only to have a space of possibilities that someone might say, well, all you have in a natural picture is facts. What you find there is what it is. All other things that you can imagine, that's a modal space, is actually a constraint of a broader space of possibilities. It's just put by hand, but doesn't belong to the natural naked picture of the world. So my question is, if this notion is a way of really naturalizing information, how can you make it compatible with this kind of potential observation and objection?
I never gave much thought about that. Why? Because I sort of took the lead from Howard Patti and some other guys, which Howard Patti was a physicist, and he moved on to biology and started trying to use his physicist tools to explain the phenomenon of biology, and he started using the notion of constraint. And I just took it over from there. I don't think he never was able to produce a concept of information entirely in terms of constraint, and that's what I tried to do, but I've never concerned myself with this kind of question.
I have four questions. Basically, it was short with Gabriel and Juan, Dan and Dan.
Okay. Two short questions. I like part of the. I really like part of your account, but I'll this curiosity. I'll see how you approach this question you talked about. I mean, I don't know if you use the term recursive, but you talk about feedback and stuff, recursive loops, and decided a strategy to explain how we have creativity or how the system reinforms itself. But I mean, and maybe there's a computer science that's not a problem for you, but philosophers are always question for the possibility of a vicious bootstrapping. How do you solve that? It's recursive. It's a recursive strategy, kind of feedback loop. It's consistent. It's consistent with top-down and bottom-up strategies because you haven't used the term top-down and bottom-up, but you have used the gesture. Many times it's like that,
and like that. So I mean, you always use your hands this way, this way. So that's the question. I want to understand the problem of bottom-up and top-down processes, and if there's any way to avoid the vicious A generates B, B generates A, and if it's recursive, it's algorithms, the strategy. The second one is, I was really buying your talk, but at the moment that you mentioned relationship between software and hardware, I mean, I almost had a heart attack. I think Rucker already explained this question. Our range, or even the diffuse system processing information in C elegans and nematode, is different from a computer in a very important sense. They are wetware, the program and the physical structure so intimately. You cannot compare to a computer where the software and the hardware are really independent parts. And whenever I'm speaking, are happening now processes in my brain, in my, for example, broadcast area. And the way the process is multiplicating the structure itself. And that's not happening in a normal silicon machine, I would say. So that's the only problem I see in your software is a waste of money.
Let's start with the first part of the question. The first question.
Those two different questions.
Yeah.
The same question.
My view is that the big insight, the negativist approach, is this idea of circular causality, which was instantiated in the theory of autopoiesis. And I think that a circular causal process can happen when you have this interplay of process and structure. This way you can have A causing B and B causing A. Because a process can change the structure of a piece of matter, and this piece of matter can eventually constrain the way the process is going on. So I don't think there's a big problem with this sort of circular causality when it is instantiated in this way. Right? So this is the first part of it. The first question. The answer for the first question. The answer for the second question is, well, I would say, I didn't write it here, software and hardware, right? But I think, yeah, I mentioned it, but I will give you two answers. The first one is, why do I think that software and hardware fit this? It fits this exactly in this way. You have a machine which is over there, you never change it. Right. But then you have a process which is, you write the software, you run the machine, it either works or it doesn't work, then you can come in here and you can change the software. So it's basically this idea of separating the process and the structure and then instantiate this possibility of changing the structure and feeding it to the process again to see if it works. I think this is actually done in computer science. People are programming all the time and checking if it works or not, and then restructuring the thing. This is one answer.
But there's an external influence there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's not computer itself. Yeah, that's true. I agree. But it does instantiate when you see that this loop right here, there are people doing this. Okay?
Perfect.
And the second question to the second answer to the second question is, I don't think we have a good theory of computation yet. Right. And I think a good theory of computation should be given, I believe, in the terms that I have given here. Computation as a process that constructs and suffers the influence of its own constraints. And it's really far away from what we seem to have in those machines over here.
So a good theory of computation would already presupposes machine learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, very novel.
Thank you. Let's move on. Go on and then finish this part.
Cheers. That was really cool. And I was thinking about how this was similar to questions about the metaphysics of dispositions and that literature. So let me explain. So there's this question about how manifestations happen. How is it that a particular disposition gets manifested given a particular particular stimulus. And there you have questions about effects and anecdotes that really model the picture. Comes C.B. Martin and says, well, no, stop thinking about that and think about dispositions as two mutually manifestating dispositions, where what happens when we call something a manifestation of something really is not a matter of stimulus plus disposition, but rather two dispositions come together. And here's what the apple comes. It's not signal theory where you have a signal and program, but rather two programs come together. The question really comes when we're talking, the problem is now that we don't know how to obtain metaphysics literature. We don't know how to individuate dispositions and manifestations because we lost really track of how we do it. Now, do we have the analogous problem here too? So, do we have a way of integrating machines and information, or we just lose that problem? So how do you answer to that kind of question about how we're going to really talk about that?
Computer scientist, I'm almost lost this discussion. Most of the time, I just assume that it makes sense to do this sort of talk that I do. And sometimes Franz Kelder asks questions like this to me, and I say, no, I'm talking this to people that know what those things mean. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this question. I haven't given much thought about it. So sorry.
So, but then, so I thought you had an answer, so that's why I was asking.
Perhaps I do. I know that I do.
It wasn't meant to be a trick question.
I know. That's clear. That's clear. Actually,
but
it would be interesting if you ask me again the question, and you tell me how do I already know the answer to your question.
Disappointed. Like a physical disappointment.
Maybe I have to say, words of word. I mean, so what the question kind of that is when does it become a message, right? And maybe the answer is it doesn't. Right? That's a better answer. And maybe what the account you're giving to enables us to get you. Depends on what you already entered in. I like the beginning. I like the whole book, but I think we're trying to supply a theory of information. And maybe we really, if we keep our notions clean, there are notions of information already on the market that we know about from various things. Why do we need to now think that this is a theory of information so much as an account of the dynamics of the system, right? That is information free about what you can do in response to it. That's how I would unpack most of what's there. I mean, then it becomes quite interesting whether it in the end works out as like a theory of computation or not. But then it relates to that question, right? You don't want to need to do more than individuate the disposition of response, right? You don't have to worry about answering the kind of questions you just don't want to answer, right? Because those questions probably don't really get you very far. They become philosophers' questions. When do I can, when is, those kind of metaphysical puzzles will be thrown up to you. I think the right answer is that they're not really relevant to the development of science if your story is along the right lines. I wonder what you had to say about that. Maybe this is not a theory of information.
Well, actually, I think it is indeed interesting to me. I'm not sure if I have like the tools and the preparation to give good answers to that. I'm not sure also if what I'm going to say goes in the direction that I have about that, but I think these sort of ideas help me to start seeing information and computation in many places where people are not used to see. So I think now I can point out there's information here, there's computation here, and I'm not sure if this is sort of trying to individuate the notion of information here or there, right? So I think I'm really interested in doing this philosopher's part of the business, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if right now I can give like prompt answers, but I'm doing. It's certainly interesting.
You see, everything that you say is compatible if you don't want to do it, I'll do the rest. You say, you don't have to, that's my favorite thing to do, but you can say you don't have to, you haven't gone this far, you get all the goodies without any of the things. You want to ask questions of a certain type, then you're almost inevitably led back to the problematic, puzzles. And they don't seem to be doing any work. That's the great part, right? You don't care. You're doing your science, put that aside, I don't need to get it done. That's it.
Okay, just to comment, because I had written this. It seemed to me like it's the same thing as with Nancy. It seems like you're saying, hey, here's a richer view, information-loaded view of the part. You could also say, hey, no, here's a more austere view of information. It seems to me that you could take your talk in both ways, but you seem to be wanting to go the first way.
Which is, again, please?
Your talk could be seen as, or could be, you could be seen as saying, hey, here's a richer information-loaded view of how parts in the physical world interact. But you could also say, hey, here's a more austere view of information in which you get rid of the notion of information. And you see,
It's not more austere, it's what's the limit.
or a view which makes a very light view of information, which doesn't involve all those puzzles. And it seems to me that you want to go the first way and not the second way. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm following actually the details of the subtleties of the philosophy of the thing. What I can say is that I have been puzzled by those about information in their relation to the physical world, and I have collected several remarks about information from many authors, which when I look to my account, I say I can instantiate that. And I can instantiate these and these and these and these, the material character of information, the natural. And then I get excited about that and say, this is information, because everything that people say information has or looks like, I see this here. So why not call this a theory of information and try to solve this as a theory of information? All this is
I was happy with all what you were saying until before he got worried. I'm worried about the one between language and social groups.
language and social
Language and social groups. So I mean, it was that was quick, but social group is what we call social groups, and what we call language. Might thought to be that we didn't discuss at all. So I don't see how we get from DNA to cell relation and body brain social groups. Unless you are saying something quite general, like with sound, and sound has a constraint for system. But I don't see any substantive accounts of what language or social groups are. Maybe I missed something.
Okay, so the ideas are also not well formulated yet, but let me try. What is the main idea of this account of information? It's this sort of separation and openness of an information system. So an information system is sort of incomplete, and it's completed. It's something that comes from the outside and conditions its behavior. The environment. Intuition is social groups start putting constraints on one another. And more importantly, these constraints are not natural constraints. Like I put constraints on you and you put constraints on me. And this develops. And then this becomes sort of a separate system almost. and this is the key idea, because this is sort of external to us, inspection, then we can play with the constraints that are being exerted upon us. And then we can constraints. And my language is by allowing the constraints to be there and visible. And external to the system.
There are many issues, like the behavior of ants, by talking about how they exchange leaves and how they have, a complex social system. We can be talking about that. We can talk of how they organize themselves and how they construct their needs as having a language. So my point is, there might be good ideas, there might be good tools for thinking, of general features, like talk about constraints, talk about system organization, externality, but talk about us and our language and groups that are human groups or private groups. That seems to require a little more, because that doesn't mean that what you're saying might not be useful in a story about these capacities, but what you just said applies to, a rat, with this little
of the ants. Let's take our example of the ants. The ants live in a community, a social group, they do things together, they collect together, and they have external constraints which are placed on the environment by themselves, which constrain themselves, but they don't play with the constraints themselves. An ant doesn't go there and change the position of the pheromone. And language allows...
But you don't have any explanation of that. The whole point is that there is a difference. This is my point. There's a difference between how the ants, everything you said about the constraints applies to the ants. Then again, language performance is different. So the explanation of how these different work is not already there. Right?
The fact that we play...
Yes, we have. Because if the general, you say, well, there is a difference between the way in which language works with humans, is that the way the ants interact are not flexible. And the question is, how do we explain that? And I don't think we get an explanation of that just by saying, it's the structure, because this might be, I'm not sure that it is, but it might be different. In important ways. How is it different? We don't get an explanation of how is it different. Because if supposed to be structured as the other, and maybe it's not. And I think it's fair to say this is not a question, very basic.
Do you want to say something? Okay, I think what's different, and it's exclusive with respect to language and humans, and I think is the thing that differentiates us from all the rest humans, is that we play with our own constraints. We have a way of manipulating and regulating the use of the constraints that constrain ourselves. And this is very specific. This is about the language, and I don't think the same sort of thing goes on with the ants or any other animal. That's my answer to this.
My one explanation.
Well, discussion.
We can continue the conversation.
Yeah, let's bring the discussion to the right time. Thank you again. We will start again at 4 p.m. with Gabriel. 4 p.m. Okay? 4 p.m. again. Good job. Thank you very much.